Hi, so this is the second part of my presentation. I ended with the distinction between Egyptology and Egyptosophy, and the problem I think it raises for theosophical reading of religious texts, and that I think it needs to be confronted. We can't confront it directly because the Theosophical Society hasn't done the work to compete with the academic enterprise of the study of Egypt. So the only way forward that I could think of was to provincialize or to decenter Egyptology. That is to undermine Egyptology as being the only way of understanding Egypt, but to do it with some sort of philosophical grounding. So in the second part of my talk, the first section, I want to just try and provide an example of the philosophical grounding. In the second part, I want to provide a reframing narrative for why we study religious texts. And in the third and final part of my presentation, I want to argue that we need to evolve our presentation into practical, meditative, and contemplative techniques. I'm going to begin with the philosophical foundation. The first author I want to reference is Richard Rorty, an American philosopher, a pragmatist. And he wrote the following. I'm just going to read it. He writes, "The right question to ask is, for what purposes would it be useful to hold that belief about ancient Egyptians or what they may have themselves believed? Pragmatists think that the question to ask about our beliefs is not whether they are about reality or merely about appearance, but simply whether they are the best habits of action for gratifying our desires. On this view, to say that a belief is, as far as we know, true, is to say that no alternative belief is, as far as we know, a better habit of acting. When we say that our ancestors believed falsely that the sun went round the earth, and that we believe truly that the earth goes round the sun, we are saying that we have a better tool than our ancestors did. Our ancestors might rejoin that their tool enabled them to believe in the literal truth of the Christian scriptures, whereas ours does not. Our reply has to be, I think, that the benefits of modern astronomy and of space travel outweigh the advantages of Christian fundamentalism. The argument between us and our medieval ancestors should not be about which of us got the universe right. It should be about the point of holding views about the motion of heavenly bodies, the ends to be achieved by the use of certain tools. Confirming the truth of Scripture is one such aim. Space travel is another. Another way to make this last point is to say that we pragmatists cannot make sense of the idea that we should pursue truth for its own sake. We cannot regard truth as a goal of inquiry. The purpose of inquiry is to achieve agreement among human beings about what to do, to bring about consensus on the ends to be achieved and the means to be used to achieve those ends. In this passage, he says, if you want to land a lunar module on Mars, you'll adopt the vocabulary of science. If you want to believe in the literal truth of the Christian scriptures and go to heaven, you will adopt the language of Christianity. He does not think they have to be brought together, and he does not think that either of those vocabularies gets the world right. The world has no preferred way of being described. But you adopt certain vocabularies to achieve certain ends. The ends that I am suggesting Theosophists propose for their study is that of preparation or initiation. That is why we study. linked to that, I think we could make use of some literary theory to create space for theosophical conceptions and theosophical ideas, not to prove them true. Nothing can prove our statements true, but one can do away with the notion of truth and replace it with other purposes. One of the theories proposed is that of the death of the author. Here it was argued that authorial intention did not set the final meaning of a text. So to try and understand what was in the mind of the author when they wrote a text, would somehow provide closure on what and final authority for what a text meant. But this notion of the author came under a lot of critical examination. And for various reasons, authorial intention does not provide closure on the meaning of a text. For instance, the author may have unconsciously put meaning in a text. The idea of that authors may draw on other texts and intertextuality. And then you have this infinite regress of what did that author of that previous text mean. Language itself has a surplus meaning and a signifying power beyond just what an author can wield. So we don't have to try and understand, for example, what the writer of the Book of the Dead meant. It is completely inaccessible to us. With this death of the author narrative came in response reader response theories. In these, the idea is that it's the reader who brings the meaning to a text. And I think this is useful for us because this is what is actually happening in our studies. And in our study, I'm specifically thinking of our studies of the secret doctrine. Every student of the doctrine approaches the text and understands it in their own unique way. There's no set meaning to achieve. It creates space for creativity and personal and private responses to the situation. This may seem a bit obscure, but here's a quote from Bowen on how to study the secret doctrine, and he writes, "She, Blavatsky, is telling us, without a doubt, not to anchor ourselves in her as the final authority, that is the death of the author, nor to anyone else's, but to depend altogether upon our own widening perceptions, and that is the birth of the reader response theory." So we can use a contemporary philosophical language to understand what we are doing in our study of the text. And that's the doubling of language that I'm trying to point to. Another philosopher who also dealt with interpretation and meaning and hermeneutics was Hans-Georg Gadamer. And in his ideas, the reader and the text enter into a dialogue. The text itself brings certain truth claims to the dialogue, and we as the reader approach the text under the sign of prejudice and tradition. There's no neutral standpoint from which one can interpret a text. There's no objective final understanding of a text. It's always this dialogue between the reader and the text, and both are changed. Through this dialogue is achieved a fusion of horizons between the meaning and the truth of the text and what the reader brings. And both are changed through this interchange. And I think this is for me, a wonderful description of what in fact happens when we study the secret doctrine. We enter into a relationship with the secret doctrine. It's a personal relationship. You can betray the relationship. You can foster it. So I'm entering a sort of textual mysticism here, or textual fetishism, but that is what I wish to do. The secret doctrine is our contribution. And we can ground our engagement, that is to say, our study of it, in a certain philosophical background. So that's the first part of my presentation, to provide some sort of decentering narrative that Egyptologists don't have the only way to understand ancient Egypt. They have a tradition, a prejudice with which they approach texts, and Theosophists have their own tradition, their own prejudice, their own situatedness, their own context, and their own reason for reading the text. So we study the texts. Why do we study? I just want to say a few things about the importance of study. And the first, of course, is we are in the fourth round in the fifth root race. We are evolving our mental principle. For me, we must study. We must use our mind. And we have a very special text with which we do that. And that, for me, is the secret doctrine. The doctrine study is the foundation of any lodge, in my experience. You can't skip the study. It's not just the book learning. When you study the doctrine, you are doing certain things. And what you are doing is tracing in your mind the great themes of the doctrine. These themes are that of creation and dissolution macrocosmically, and the stages of birth and death. And I just want to read a short passage here that I found on a study of Pythagoras, because it brings all these issues together and explains to me what I think we are doing in the study. This is by Guthrie. He wrote on Pythagoras, and he notes, "The world is a cosmos, that untranslatable word which unites, as perhaps only the Greek spirit could, the notion of order, arrangement, or structural perfection with that of beauty. All nature is akin. Therefore, the soul of man is intimately related to the living and divine universe. Like is known by like. That is, the better one knows something, the more one is assimilated to it. Hence, to seek through philosophy for a better understanding of the structure of the divine cosmos is to realize and cultivate the divine element in oneself." And this, to me, is a great description of what we are doing in our doctrine study. To seek through philosophy for a better understanding of the structure of the divine cosmos is to realize and cultivate the divine element in oneself. So what we are doing in the study of the doctrine is tracing the stages in a certain way in our mind, according to our teachings, of the creation and dissolution and the stages of birth and death. And this links us to what happens in the initiations. It is a mirror of what happens in the initiations. It's not the initiation itself, but it is, I'm suggesting here, essential preparation. It's just Grace Knoke, a leader of Pasadena, who just brought all these concepts together in a short sentence. Sleep is an incomplete death, unconsciously performed. Death is a complete sleep, unconsciously performed. Initiation is a self-conscious sleep, or death of the lower elements, with an equally self-cognizing liberation of the spiritual soul along the same pathways of sleep and death. So in initiation, which is a mystic ascent for us through the planes and through the after-death states, but fully aware, this is what we are studying in the secret doctrine. But, I want to say that it is essential to us that this study be done as preparation. In this mystic ascent, I have a few more quotes in my paper. But here is just the famous one from the Isis Mysteries. "I approached the confines of death. I trod the thresholds of Proserpine, and borne through the elements I returned. At midnight, I saw the sun shining in all his glory. I approached the gods below and the gods above. I stood beside them and I worshipped them. Behold, I have told you my experience. Yet what you hear can mean nothing to you. I shall therefore keep to the facts which can be declared to the profane without offense. Here is the actual initiation process, approaching the gods, a mystic ascent. We do that through our study and preparation. And just as an aside here, I want to mention that sort of small theosophical controversy of the inner and outer rounds. The inner rounds being the passage of the monad or spiritual soul through the planes of the planetary chain, the outer rounds being the journey through the various planets in our solar system. And these are the type of debates, these intra-theosophical debates, which I wish there were more of in the society. These are the things for us to study and consider, and eventually, of course, to experience. The third reason I think study is important. So the first two being we're in the fifth race. Second being we are preparing to study of certain themes for the initiation process. It's, the third reason about is what I'm calling constructivism. And I want to make a claim here, which is that you can only experience what you know. I'm sure there will be a lot of disagreement with that, but I hope to show that by taking this position, we can bring ourselves into alignment with a certain strand of academic study of mysticism. So in general, there's three sort of perspectives on mysticism academically. The first is essentialism, which is to say that there's a common core to all mystical experiences, independent of culture, the so-called pure consciousness experience. Yeah, mental events that allegedly involve an emptying out by a subject of all phenomenological qualities and content, leaving unconditioned consciousness. That's the first. The second is perennialism, that there are mystical, universal mystical doctrines about about mystical religious doctrines about what is allegedly experienced that transcend all cultures and religions, a common core of esoteric doctrines that are expressed differently in different religions and cultures. Now, I think most theosophists would endorse one or two of these. But I want to now try and suggest that we can, and these two have been broadly defeated in academia. There are peripheral views now that perennialism or essentialism may be supported. What's more popular is what is called a constructivist approach. And I want to here try and argue that we can adopt this approach through our own textual understanding and to our benefit. Constructivism broadly suggests that all mystical phenomena, including the mystic's own understanding of their experiences and of what they experienced, must be understood in terms of each particular mystic's culture and era. So in here, a pure consciousness experience would be, in a sense, a complete losing of oneself in absolute consciousness beyond language, concept, and thought. You might imagine some contentless experience which one translates into one's culture, but that's what is being argued against in constructivism. There is no contentless experience. There is always some sort of conceptualization. An extreme form of this would be that language itself structures and determines your complete experience. And I want to argue for this in theosophy, and I'm going to try and bring some sort of theosophical evidence to support this. So the first is, losing oneself completely beyond language and etc., absolute consciousness, I don't think is our theosophical position. We don't hold a one absolute consciousness doctrine. We hold a one substance principle. Furthermore, as I read Theosophy, we never actually ever leave the manifested realms. We teach an endless evolution. There is only ever perfection for a particular state or a particular stage of evolution. We might become perfect human beings, but we only then enter the lower ranges of the gods. We are always in manifestation in some sense. I just found a few quotes which I wanted to bring forward to try and bolster my position. The first is from N. Sri Ram, Theosophist, and he writes, "With the sword of my will, I carve for myself a throne in the realm of the spirit, which I shall ascend." And it seems to me that thrones are different shapes and different sizes. We each have our own throne. We each carve our own place in the realm of the spirit. We never simply dissolve entirely. Here is HPB, she writes, "Whether it be orthodox Advaita or not, I maintain as an occultist on the authority of the secret doctrine that though merged entirely into Parabrahm, man's spirit, while not individual per se, yet preserves its distinct individuality in Paranirvana, owing to the accumulation in it of the aggregates or skandhas that have survived after each death from the highest faculties of the manas." So even in the Paranirvana, she says here, there are the skandhas. There is some sense of individuality, differentiation. Here's my final quote on this from the inner group teachings. She writes, "If 12 people are smoking together, the smoke of their cigarettes may mingle, but the molecules of the smoke from each have an affinity with each other and remain distinct forever and ever, no matter how the whole mass may interblend. So a drop of water, though it fall into the ocean, retains its individuality. It has become a drop with a life of its own, like man, and cannot be annihilated." And I'm playing here on the drop into the ocean metaphor. Here for HPB, the drop always retains its own individuality. What I'm trying to draw is a parallel between a constructivist approach where experience is constructed and the idea that we never lose ourselves completely in absolute consciousness. There is always some sense in which we are individual. We are in our own throne, on our own throne. So there won't be language as we speak here in some such exalted state, but there will be something that we have brought to the experience. And that is the importance of study. We bring our study, what we prepare ourselves for is what we bring to our experiences. And those students of the doctrine will experience the doctrine teachings and no one else will. But this is, just quickly now, another intra-theosophical debate, which I always enjoy and feel challenged by. Sri Krishna Prem and Ashish in their book, The Measure of All Man, study of some of the stanzas of the doctrine. In opposition to James Long, another Pasadena president, Prem writes of meditation as release from the constant flow of cyclic events is across the stream. That is to say, he's talking of circumventing the rounds and the root races. Through meditational practices, you seek liberation. And you open any textbook or any book of Hinduism or Buddhism, and of course, the first thing is, human beings need liberation from this wheel of suffering. And for Prem, this is to sort of circumvent the cycles of the rounds and the root races. But here's Long in response. He writes, while a question is put to him, why the hurry to get rid of the wheel of existence? What is the point of trying to attain nirvana now? And Long responds, there is not only no point in such endeavor, but it is absolutely a mistaken concept. This overemphasis on attaining nirvana has been for centuries one of the greatest drawbacks in Oriental thinking. And now in the West, for those who are coming into contact with Buddhist and Vedantist thought, it is likewise becoming a stumbling block in the path of progress. So I think Long has a theosophical point. We talk an obligatory pilgrimage. We teach an evolution, which Hindus and Buddhists don't, through the planetary chain, through our rounds and route races. We can't skip any stage. It's a cycle of necessity. We must go through it. So you can't circumvent the rounds and the route races. And there is no way out, so to speak. Even liberation, theosophically speaking, is only perfection as, for example, a human being, whereafter you enter the lower stages of a different order of being. So these are just the intra-theosophical debates, which I wish there were more of. So now it's the final part of my presentation. I want to point to the future, and I'm using the word assimilating here. So, we study, let us say we study ancient texts. Why do we study ancient texts? In the case of Egyptology, we aren't even really doing a particularly thorough study of it. But yet, I want to say with Rorty that we study our texts for a reason. We are learning how past cultures dealt with their installation of the wisdom tradition. The Theosophical Society is not now or in the past, or not now, the only carrier of a wisdom installment, but we study other texts and other cultures to understand what they did with their installment. How did they work with it? And I think one of the things that they did is that they transformed their material into practices, into meditational practices. And this is, I think, what the Theosophical Society will still have to do. So just to sort of keep my flow of thoughts here, we study a specific type of study, creation, dissolution, the birth and death processes. This mirrors what happens in initiation. But we can convert these teachings into actual practices. And we can look for examples of how this was done in other wisdom traditions. I took this idea from David Regal, as I understood him, on the Kala Chakra Tantra, where he points out that in the doctrine, we have what the equivalent to the outer sections of the Kala Chakra Tantra, the cosmos, the nature of the human being. But what we don't have is the inner sections, the actual sadhana, the meditational practices. And this is what I think we are missing in the Theosophical Society. That is the work for the future. Here's just a supporting quote on the origin of Buddhist meditation, and the author writes, "Thus it seems that the most basic presupposition of the early Brahmanic passages on meditation is that the creation of the world must be reversed through a series of meditative states by the yogin who seeks the realization of the self." So that is what I'm arguing we are doing in our doctrine study, reversing creation, reversing the stages of death, but we do it through study. We must also do it through meditational practices. I want to sort of bring it to a close. Let's bring an example of a culture that has converted their teachings into meditational practices, because I think we can learn from them, and in fact, I think we must learn from them and assimilate to us what belongs to us. This is from one of the Tibetan Tantras. They have the perfection and secret mantra vehicle, and perfection is the path of virtue. So Theosophy is essentially, as I understand it, it's a path of virtue. It's a perfection vehicle path. Tibetan Tantra is a secret mantra, or Vajrayana path, which is the perfections, and deity yoga. But what are they doing? Those practices lead to the three bodies, the Dharmakaya body, the Sambhogakaya body, and the emanation body. And in this meditational practices, they describe it as meditating on taking death as the path for establishing the Dharma body, the first of the three bodies. Meditating on taking the intermediate stage as the path for establishing the enjoyment body, the second of the three bodies. Meditating on taking birth as the path for establishing the emanation body, the third of the three bodies. But what are they doing? How do they read their texts? And here is a response. In ordinary existence, an individual experiences the stage of death, intermediate state, and birth uncontrollably due to the force of karma and affliction. But in the generation stage, practitioners first meditate on states resembling ordinary death, intermediate state, and rebirth in order to gain familiarity with this process. So we study this in our studies. Tibetan Buddhists experience this in meditation. The mirroring of the birth, the intermediate and rebirth stages is the experience of birth and death. And this is what we study, but they do it in meditational practice. And we have to evolve to this point as well. All mystical cultures did this because this is what happens in the initiations. And just here as very final example from the same Tantra. This is before they even do generation stage practices, but they will do certain visualizations. So here is a mandala visualization, which mirrors the creation process. And they will also do one for dissolution. But the object corresponding to the visualization of the celestial mansion of the mandala is the periodic evolution of the world following the empty eon, as described in the Abhidharmas. So they are visualizing the creation process. And then they describe it. This begins with a light wind flowing down from the second concentration, gradually increasing in force, creating the physical world with the three mandalas of wind, water, and golden earth. And upon them, Mount Meru, 7 ranges of mountains, the 7 lakes between them, the 4 continents, the 8 subcontinents, and the outer ocean up to the rim mountain that surrounds the world. Following the visualization of the celestial mansion, the indwelling deities are visualized in correspondence with the periodic evolution of sentient beings that follows the formation of the physical world. Here I see a hint towards our own primary and secondary creations processes in the secret doctrine, but not as study, as actual visualizations. And this is what I'm suggesting the Theosophical Society must evolve. But we look at other mystic cultures to see how they work with the material, to understand how we can work with ours and draw it into our lodges. So that's the end of my talk. What I want to say is the Theosophical Society has the theory, the microcosmic, macrocosmic correspondences. We have the ethical foundation. We have the birth, death, and creation homologies. These are things to be worked with, things to be done, things to be used. And we must work with them. And just as my final sort of concluding thought was a quote that I think links Theosophy to the constructivist position I was trying to take. And he writes, whatsoever form or shape a divine being, a divinity longs for, that very thing the divine being becomes. So we as individuals are divine beings. The Theosophical Society is a divine being, but what is it yearning to become? Thank you.